10 wolves surrounded her house. Then the Alpha King stepped out of the dark. Tessa Monroe woke to the sound of claws moving over frozen ground. Slow, heavy, too deliberate to be deer. For 6 years, she had lived alone in Cedar Vale, 15 miles from the nearest pack road, and she had learned every sound the forest could make. Wind in pine branches, ice cracking along the creek, foxes scratching beneath the shed. This was none of those things. Tessa slid from bed without lighting the lamp. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor. She reached beneath the small table beside her bed and closed her hand around her mother's hunting knife. Another scrape came from outside. Then another, circling the cabin. Tessa crossed to the window and lifted the curtain less than an inch. Her breath stopped. A massive black wolf stood beneath the pine trees. Snow rested across its shoulders. It was watching the house. Another shape moved near the woodpile. Then another beside the shed. Tessa counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. Her pulse climbed. 4, 5, 6. By the time she reached 10, her hand had gone cold around the knife. 10 wolves, all larger than the wild wolves that sometimes crossed Cedar Vale. None of them paced. None of them growled. They simply stood around her cabin in a wide circle, silent beneath the falling snow. Tessa had spent 6 winters teaching herself not to panic. Panic wasted heat. Panic wasted time. Panic made bad decisions feel reasonable. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her mother's old cloak around her shoulders, and opened the front door. Cold air struck her face. Every wolf looked toward her at once. Tessa stopped on the porch. "I do not have food for you." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "And I do not have anything worth taking." No wolf moved. Then the one nearest the steps shifted its weight. Tessa saw its front left leg. Brown cloth was wrapped around it. Her cloth. She knew the uneven tear. She knew the knot. That morning, 3 miles south of the cabin, she had found a black wolf caught beside an illegal iron trap. It had been exhausted and frightened, but it had allowed her close enough to free its leg and wrap the injury. She had told it to go home. Apparently, it had, and it had brought company. "You?" Tessa whispered. The wolf lowered its head. Then, one after another, the other 9 did the same. Tessa forgot the cold. 10 enormous wolves were bowing in her yard. A branch snapped beyond them. The wolves parted without a sound. A man stepped through the opening. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a dark winter coat that looked too fine for a traveler this deep in Cedar Vale. Snow clung to his black hair. He walked without hurry, yet every animal in the clearing seemed aware of him. Tessa tightened her grip on the knife. Then moonlight caught the silver emblem fastened near his collar. A crowned wolf. Her stomach dropped. She had seen that symbol only on royal notices brought through Moon Hollow years ago. The man stopped at the edge of her porch. Gray-silver eyes settled on her face. For one strange second, all the noise in the forest seemed to disappear. His expression changed. Barely. A tightening of breath. A flicker of surprise he hid almost immediately. Tessa noticed anyway. Powerful men had never brought good news into her life. She raised the knife slightly. "If you are lost, the main road is south." His gaze dropped to the blade, then returned to her eyes. No anger, no command. "I am not lost." His voice was low and calm. Tessa glanced at the 10 wolves surrounding him. "Then you have a strange way of visiting people." Something almost like amusement touched his face, but it vanished quickly. He removed one glove and showed her the heavy silver signet on his hand, the same crowned wolf. There was no mistaking it now. Alpha King Declan Avery stood outside the cabin of an Omega nobody had cared enough to visit in 6 years. Tessa felt the old instinct to lower her eyes. She refused it. "What does the Alpha King want with me?" Declan studied her for a long moment. Then he said her name. Tessa Monroe. The knife nearly slipped from her fingers. She had never met him. She had never sent word to the crown. As far as Moon Hollow was concerned, she had disappeared 6 years ago and stayed gone. Tessa stepped closer to the edge of the porch. "How do you know my name?" Declan looked past her for a moment, toward the lonely cabin, the stacked firewood, the single set of footprints in the snow. Then his eyes returned to hers. "Because I did not come to Cedar Vale by accident." The words should have frightened Tessa more than the wolves. Instead, they opened a door she had spent 6 years trying to keep shut. Moon Hollow came back to her in pieces. Cold stone beneath her shoes. Lantern light trembling against the gathering stone. 200 wolves standing in a circle beneath a white winter moon. And Miles Carrington looking at her as if she had already embarrassed him by existing. Tessa had been 20 then. Young enough to still believe that if she endured the whispers long enough, someone would eventually decide she belonged. Her wolf had never completed a shift. Her scent was faint. Every full moon left her bones aching, and every healer visit ended with the same quiet disappointment. "Be patient. Take your medicine. Some wolves awaken late." Tessa had repeated those words to herself until they became something close to prayer. The moon bond ceremony was supposed to change everything. She had worn her mother's dark blue cloak because it was the finest thing she owned. She had braided her chestnut hair twice because her hands would not stop shaking. When Miles stepped onto the gathering stone and their names were called together, hope rose so quickly inside her that it almost hurt. He had known her since childhood. He had walked her home after winter lessons. He had once told her that quiet did not mean weak. For one foolish moment, Tessa believed that meant he had seen something in her that the others had missed. Then Miles looked around at the pack, at his father, at the future everyone expected from him, and his expression hardened. "I reject Tessa Monroe as my mate." The sentence was simple. That made it worse. No hesitation, no apology, no private kindness hidden beneath the cruelty. A murmur moved through the crowd. Tessa heard someone whisper defective. Someone else laughed softly. She kept her eyes on Miles because looking anywhere else would have meant seeing every face she had grown up with. People who had shared meals with her. People whose children she had watched. People who knew she had nowhere else to go. The elder asked whether she accepted the rejection. Tessa could barely feel her hands. Her wolf, weak and distant even then, seemed to curl deeper inside her. Miles waited. His father watched from the front row with cold approval. Tessa understood the truth before she spoke. No one was coming forward. No one was going to stop this. "I accept." Something inside her went painfully quiet. The bond broke. The ceremony moved on. That was the part she remembered most clearly. Not the humiliation, not the whispers, the fact that everyone simply continued as if nothing important had happened. By midnight, Tessa had packed everything she owned into one small bag: her mother's cloak, her mother's hunting knife, a few dried herbs, 2 shirts. She left Moon Hollow without saying goodbye because she could not think of anyone who had earned one. She walked north until the pack scents faded behind her. Then she kept walking. Cedar Vale was neutral land, wild, isolated, and far enough away that no one from Moon Hollow had reason to follow. The first winter nearly broke her. The second taught her how to listen to snow. By the third, she could repair the roof, smoke meat, identify tracks, and wake from sleep at the smallest unfamiliar sound. Years passed. No letter came. No messenger. No friend standing uncertainly at the edge of the trees. Tessa stopped waiting. She stopped measuring her life by what Moon Hollow had refused to give her. But every full moon, the old pain returned, deep in her joints, a restless pressure beneath her skin. Sometimes she dreamed of running on 4 legs through snow she had never seen. She always woke before reaching the end of the trail. Tessa had told herself it was only grief. Only the memory of a wolf that had never truly existed. Now, standing on her porch 6 years later, she looked at Declan Avery and wondered why the Alpha King knew the name of a woman her own pack had forgotten. Declan seemed to read the question in her face. He did not move closer. "The Crown has records," he said. "Not complete ones, but enough to know you left Moon Hollow after a rejection ceremony 6 years ago." Tessa felt the cold differently then. Why would the Crown care about that? Declan glanced toward the bandaged wolf beside him, then back to her. Until today, it did not. Declan followed her gaze to the bandaged wolf. "His name is Everett Shaw," he said. "He is captain of my royal guard." Tessa looked at the animal again, and the morning returned to her with sudden clarity. She had been checking a patch of wintergreen 3 miles south of the cabin when she heard the sound. Not a howl, not even a growl. A low, strained breath from somewhere beyond the cedar trees. Tessa had stopped immediately. The forest was usually honest with her. Birds warned of strangers. Deer tracks told her where the snow was thin. Even silence had a shape if she listened long enough. That sound did not belong. She followed it carefully and found the black wolf beside a fallen pine. One front leg was caught in an iron trap half buried beneath the snow. The animal was enormous, larger than any wild wolf she had ever seen. Its dark eyes tracked every step she took. Tessa stayed several feet away. "I am not going to hurt you." The wolf did not relax. Neither did she. She set her herb basket down and studied the trap. Heavy iron, newer than anything local hunters used. A sharp, bitter scent clung to the metal. Wolfsbane. Tessa knew enough about herbs to recognize it, but not enough to understand why someone had coated a trap with it this deep inside neutral land. The wolf tried to shift its weight and stopped. Tessa raised one hand. "Easy." She had no reason to help it. That was what common sense told her. A frightened wolf that size could turn on her. No one knew she was out there. No one would come looking if she disappeared between the trees. But the animal looked at her with something that felt too close to understanding. Tessa crouched slowly. "If you wanted me gone, I think you would have made that clear already." The wolf blinked once. It was not agreement. Still, Tessa took it. She used a fallen branch to hold the trap steady while she worked the release. Her hands ached from the cold, and the mechanism resisted her twice before it finally opened. The wolf pulled free and stepped back. Tessa did not reach for it. She waited. After a moment, the animal lowered itself into the snow. Permission. That was how it felt. Tessa moved closer. The leg was swollen, but the wolf could still put some weight on it. She cleaned away the bitter residue with melted snow from her flask, crushed yarrow and wintergreen between her fingers, then wrapped the leg with a strip torn from the lower edge of her work skirt. "That is the best I can do," she murmured. The wolf watched her tie the knot. Tessa sat back on her heels. "Now go home." For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then the wolf stood. It limped once, tested the leg again, and disappeared between the trees. Tessa had assumed that was the end of it. She had picked up her basket, then noticed the trap still lying in the snow. Something about it bothered her. Hunters who worked Cedar Vale knew the Crown rules. No lethal traps, no wolfsbane, no pack markings. She had turned the iron over with the tip of her boot and found a shallow stamp near the hinge, worn enough that she could not make it out. At the time, she had left it where it was. Now, back on her porch beneath the falling snow, Declan reached behind his coat and took hold of a leather strap carried over one shoulder. Hanging from it was the same iron trap. Tessa stared. "You brought it." "Everett brought us back to it first." Declan crouched and set the trap carefully on the snow between them. "My people inspect illegal hunting equipment when it is found on Crown land." Tessa stepped down from the porch, keeping the knife at her side. Up close, the worn stamp looked clearer beneath the lantern light. A crescent, 3 pine marks beneath it. Her chest tightened. She knew that symbol. She had seen it burned into storage crates, hammered into tools, stamped on old supply wagons throughout her childhood. Declan watched her face change. "You recognize it?" Tessa did not answer immediately. She looked from the trap to the 10 silent wolves surrounding her cabin. Then she whispered, "Moon Hollow." Tessa kept staring at the crescent mark until the cold seemed to move beneath her skin. Moon Hollow was 15 miles south, far enough that no hunter from the pack should have been setting traps anywhere near Cedar Vale, far enough that she had spent 6 years believing the distance meant safety. Declan lifted the iron trap by its leather strap and handed it to one of the guards after the wolf shifted briefly into human form beneath the shelter of the trees, dressed, and secured the evidence without a word. Tessa noticed the efficiency of it. No confusion, no wasted movement. These wolves had traveled together for years. She had spent 6 years learning how to survive alone. They had spent those same years learning how to trust one another. The thought made something tighten behind her ribs. "Why would Moon Hollow be hunting here?" Declan asked. "I do not know." "Did they ever use wolfsbane traps when you lived there?" "Not that I saw." Tessa pulled her cloak tighter. Snow was falling harder now, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the tree line. The black wolves moved closer to the cabin, not toward her, but toward the shelter of the shed and the old animal lean-to. Declan looked up at the sky. "The storm is turning." Tessa understood what he was asking without him saying it. She also understood what 10 wolves and a king could do if they decided her answer did not matter. Her hand tightened around the knife. Declan noticed. His gaze dropped to her fingers, then returned to her face. "You decide who enters your home." The words were so simple that she almost mistrusted them more than a command. "The shed is dry," Tessa said. "The animal shelter, too. Your people can use both." Declan gave a single nod. "Thank you." He did not order her to make room. He did not step onto the porch. He remained where he was while the guards settled around the property, some shifting to human form beneath cover, others staying as wolves. Everett remained near the steps, favoring his injured front leg. Tessa looked at the bandage she had tied that morning, and then at Declan. "You still have not told me why you came here." "Everett brought us to the trap. Then he brought us to you. That explains why you found me, not why you knew my name." Declan was silent for a moment. The storm filled the space between them. "The Crown keeps records of pact departures involving formal bond rejection." "Incomplete records," Tessa said. "You told me that." "Yes." "So why did you read mine?" His expression changed again. Not much. Just enough for her to see that this answer was harder. "Because when Everett described you, something did not fit." Tessa almost laughed. A lone Omega helping an injured wolf? An Omega living alone in Crown territory for 6 years. No pack contact. No requests for aid. No complaints. No record of relocation. Maybe I wanted to be left alone. I considered that. Declan finally stepped closer, but stopped at the bottom of the porch. "Then I saw you." Tessa felt an odd warmth move through her chest. It was sudden and unfamiliar. She told herself it was the cold. Declan removed one glove, reached toward the iron lantern hanging near the porch post, and steadied it when the wind made it swing. His fingers brushed hers by accident. The world seemed to narrow. Heat shot through Tessa's hand and climbed her arm so fast that she pulled back. Inside her, something moved. Not pain, not memory, something alive, something that had been silent for years. Tessa froze. Declan did too. From the yard, all 10 wolves lifted their heads at once. Tessa heard a sound inside herself. Faint, distant. One word she did not understand, and somehow understood completely. Him. She stepped back. "What was that?" Declan looked as shaken as she felt, though his voice stayed controlled. "My wolf recognized you the moment I saw you." Tessa stared at him. "Recognized me as what?" Declan did not soften the truth. "My mate." For one heartbeat, Tessa said nothing. Then anger arrived before fear could. "No." Declan did not move. "Tessa." "No, I already had a mate. He rejected me. I accepted. That bond ended." "I know." "Then your wolf is wrong." "Maybe." The answer stopped her. She had expected certainty, authority, a king explaining fate to her as if she had no say in it. Declan only looked at her and said, "I do not need you to believe me tonight." Tessa swallowed. "And if I never believe you?" "Then I leave you in peace." The storm thickened between them. Tessa looked toward the door, then back at him. "You can use the porch until morning, nothing more." Declan nodded. "That is enough." Hours later, when Tessa looked through the window, the Alpha King was still outside beneath the covered porch, wrapped in his dark coat, keeping exactly the boundary she had given him. And deep beneath her ribs, the wolf she had believed was broken moved again. Morning came gray and quiet after the storm. Tessa opened the cabin door and found Declan already awake beneath the porch roof. Snow gathered along the edge of his coat. He stood when he saw her, but he did not cross the threshold. "Your guard needs a healer," she said. Declan glanced toward the shed where Everett had spent the night. "She is already here." Tessa frowned. A woman stepped out from behind the animal shelter, carrying a dark leather case. She looked to be in her early 60s, with silver threaded through her dark hair, and the calm expression of someone who had spent a lifetime around frightened patients. "Nora Whitmore," she said. "Senior Royal Healer." Tessa gave a small nod. Nora did not offer her hand. She seemed to notice that Tessa preferred distance. "Everett told me you treated him yesterday." "I cleaned the wound and wrapped it. That is all." "That was enough to get him back to us." They found Everett inside the shed in human form, sitting on an overturned crate with his injured legs stretched forward. He was broad-shouldered, older than Tessa had expected, with brown hair and tired green eyes. The strip of cloth from Tessa's skirt was still tied around his lower leg. Everett looked at her and gave a quiet smile. "I owe you thanks. You already brought 10 wolves to my house. That was not entirely my decision." Declan, standing near the doorway, said nothing. Tessa almost smiled. Almost. Nora knelt beside Everett and carefully removed the old bandage. She cleaned the wound, checked the swelling, then replaced the cloth with a proper dressing from her case. "You were fortunate," Nora said. "The wolfsbane exposure was limited." Tessa leaned against the shed wall. "I smelled it on the trap." Nora looked up. "You recognized wolfsbane?" "I work with herbs. I know what it smells like." Nora studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Then her eyes dropped to Tessa's hands. "May I ask you something?" Tessa stiffened. "You may ask." Do your joints hurt during the full moon?" The question struck too close. Tessa did not answer immediately. Declan's attention sharpened. Nora remained calm. "Your wrists," she said. "There is a faint silver discoloration near the veins." Tessa pulled her sleeves lower. "It has been there for years." "How many?" "I do not know. Since I was young." Nora stood slowly. "Did Moon Hollow ever give you medicine for failed shifts?" Tessa felt the air leave her chest. "Every month." Declan stepped closer, but stopped several feet away. "What kind of medicine?" "I never knew. The pack healer said it would help my wolf wake." Nora's face changed. Not fear, recognition. "Who was the healer?" "Edwin Voss." Nora closed her case. "What did the medicine taste like?" Tessa searched her memory. Bitter, metallic, something sweet underneath, probably to hide the rest. "Like old coins and mint." Nora looked at Declan. "That is not a treatment for failed shifting." Tessa's fingers went cold. "What are you saying?" Nora moved nearer, but still kept space between them. "There is a restricted suppressant called moonbane. In controlled doses, it can help stop dangerous involuntary shifts. Used repeatedly, especially on a young wolf, it can weaken scent, delay shifting, and make the wolf seem almost absent." Tessa stared at her. The shed suddenly felt too small. "No, I am not saying this is proof," Nora said carefully. "Not yet, but your symptoms match chronic exposure." Tessa shook her head. "I stopped taking that medicine 6 years ago." "That matters. Your body may have been recovering slowly ever since." Tessa thought of the full moons, the pain, the dreams, the strange pressure beneath her skin. Then she thought of last night. One accidental touch. One word inside her. Him. Her voice came out quieter. "Could that be why my wolf moved?" Nora looked toward Declan, then back at Tessa. "A strong mate resonance can stimulate instincts that have been suppressed. It would not cure anything." but it might wake what was already trying to return. Tessa pressed one hand against her chest. For 6 years, she had believed she was broken. Before that, she had spent even longer being told the same thing. Now a different possibility stood in front of her. Someone might have made her that way on purpose. A sharp whistle sounded from outside. One of the royal guards appeared at the shed entrance. "Movement from the south!" Declan's expression hardened. "How many?" "At least 8 wolves. Moon Hollow sent." Tessa turned toward the tree line. Her old pack had ignored her for 6 years. Now, the morning after the Alpha King found her, they were coming straight to her door. The first wolf appeared between the pines less than a minute later. Then another. Then 6 more. They moved in a tight line through the snow until they reached the edge of Tessa's clearing, where the royal guards were already waiting. No one lunged. No one growled. The silence was worse. A man stepped forward from the Moon Hollow group and shifted back into human form beneath the cover of a travel cloak. Tessa knew him before she saw his face clearly. Miles Carrington had changed in 6 years. His sandy brown hair was shorter. His shoulders were broader. But the careful way he carried himself was exactly the same. He still looked like a man who expected every room to make space for him. His hazel eyes found Tessa. Surprise flashed across his face, followed quickly by something harder to name. "Tessa." Her name sounded wrong in his voice now. She walked out from beside the shed, keeping several feet between them. "Miles!" He glanced at Declan, and his posture changed immediately. "Your Majesty, we did not know the crown party had entered this section of Cedar Vale." Declan's voice stayed calm. "That is why it is called neutral territory." Miles forced a polite smile. "Of course. We are here because Moon Hollow has been investigating unauthorized traps along the northern boundary." Tessa felt Nora's gaze shift toward her. Declan said nothing. Miles continued. "We received word that a packless wolf may have been interfering with hunting equipment." Tessa almost laughed. "You mean me? You live nearest to the site. I live 3 miles from where one of your traps injured a royal guard." Miles's expression tightened. "There is no proof that trap belongs to Moon Hollow." Everett emerged from the shed, dressed and standing carefully on his injured leg. One of the guards carried the iron trap forward and set it on the snow. The crescent mark faced Miles. His eyes dropped to it for less than a second. That was enough. "Old equipment," he said. "Could have been stolen years ago." "Then you will have records," Declan replied. Miles looked back at Tessa. "This could be resolved more easily if she returned with us to answer questions." Tessa felt something old and cold settle in her stomach. "I am not a member of Moon Hollow. You were born there. And I left. After an emotional ceremony. After you rejected me." The clearing went still. Miles lowered his voice. "That was a long time ago. 6 years. People make mistakes." Tessa studied him. 6 years without one message, one apology, one attempt to find out whether she had survived her first winter. Now he stood at her home asking her to return because the Alpha King was there. "You are not here because you missed me." Miles's jaw tightened. "You should come back before this becomes more difficult." Pressure rolled through the clearing. Tessa knew it instantly. Alpha dominance. Once, it had made her lower her eyes without thinking. Now her knees trembled, but she stayed upright. Declan took one step forward, then stopped. His gaze moved to Tessa instead of Miles. "Do you want me to answer him?" The question steadied her more than any command could have. Tessa shook her head. No. She looked directly at Miles. You rejected me when you believed I was worthless. You do not get to decide I belong to you now because a king found me. Miles's composure cracked. You do not understand what you are talking about. Then explain it. You were supposed to stay broken. The words fell into the clearing. Miles went pale. Tessa stopped breathing. Declan's voice changed, not louder, colder. Supposed to? Miles looked toward his men, but there was nowhere for the sentence to go. Nora stepped beside Tessa. Everett watched in silence. Declan removed the royal signet from beneath his glove and held it where everyone could see. By Crown authority, I am opening a royal inquiry into illegal trapping, restricted suppressant use, and possible misconduct by Moon Hollow leadership. Miles swallowed. Your Majesty, that is unnecessary. Then the records will prove it. Several hours later, Tessa rode south with the royal party, Cedar Vale fading behind her beneath a pale winter sky. By evening, the familiar roofs of Moon Hollow appeared beyond the trees. At the center of the village stood the gathering stone where Miles had rejected her 6 years ago. Tessa looked at it and understood why her hands were shaking. This time, she was not returning to ask whether Moon Hollow still wanted her. She was returning to find out why they had needed her broken. By morning, the gathering stone looked exactly as Tessa remembered it. That was almost the cruelest part. The same pale rock, the same rows of wooden benches, the same pine trees standing beyond the square as if 6 years had passed without touching them. Only Tessa had changed. This time, she did not stand alone. Declan waited several feet behind her. Everett stood beside the other royal guards. Nora held a leather folder filled with records taken from the Moon Hollow infirmary during the night. Miles stood across the stone with his father, Garrett Carrington, and healer Edwin Voss. The pack gathered in uneasy silence. Declan did not begin with accusations. He began with evidence. The illegal trap had been made by a Moon Hollow smith. Its manufacturing number matched an old supply entry. The infirmary ledgers showed repeated monthly treatments under Tessa Monroe's name, but several pages had been altered. Nora opened the folder. The recorded medicine was listed as a standard shift tonic. The ingredients found in storage do not match that description. Tessa looked at Edwin. He would not meet her eyes. What was in it? She asked. Nora answered carefully. Moonbane. The word moved through the crowd in a low murmur. Tessa heard nothing after it. For years, she had swallowed that bitter medicine because adults told her it would help. She had believed every failed shift was proof that something inside her was wrong. Garrick stepped forward. That proves nothing. Old medical records can be misunderstood. Everett placed a second document on the table beside Nora. Then explained this. A former infirmary assistant named Mara Bell had been located before sunrise. Old staffing records had led the Royal Guard to her home at the edge of Moon Hollow. Years earlier, she had copied one inventory page because the restricted supplies frightened her. The copy listed Moonbane compounds delivered under Garrick's authorization. Tessa turned toward him. Why? Garrick remained silent. Nora spoke instead. Because your mother carried a rare moonborn omega trait. Tessa looked at her. What does that mean? It means your wolf was never weak. Moonborn wolves are unusually resistant to alpha dominance. They are difficult to control through instinctive pressure. Tessa slowly looked at Garrick. Understanding came before he admitted anything. He had not feared that she would fail. He had feared that she would not bow. Edwin finally spoke, his voice thin. I followed the Alpha's orders. Miles turned toward his father. You told me the medicine was necessary. Garrick's expression hardened. It was necessary. Tessa felt something inside her rise, not rage, something older, stronger. Necessary for who? Garrick looked at her as if she were still 20 years old. For the stability of the pack. Miles shook his head, but Tessa was watching him now. You knew I was being medicated. He hesitated. That was answer enough. I knew they were treating your wolf. And when you rejected me? Miles looked away. My father said you would never become what the pack needed. Tessa almost laughed. The sound never came. So you believed him? Miles's face tightened. I was trying to protect my future. Yes, Tessa said softly. That is what you have always protected. Garrick stepped toward the records table. Everett immediately moved between him and the evidence. No threat, no struggle, just a boundary Garrick could not cross. Miles suddenly turned to Tessa, and the familiar pressure rolled over the stone. Alpha dominance. Heavy, expectant. 6 years ago, her body would have obeyed before her mind understood what was happening. Her knees trembled now, her breath caught. Then something deep inside her pushed back. Heat moved through her bones, the same presence that had stirred when Declan touched her hand. Only stronger. Tessa heard her wolf clearly for the first time. Not broken, not gone. Waiting. Miles increased the pressure. Stand down! Tessa lifted her head. No. The word came out calm. The pressure cracked around her like ice under sunlight. Her senses sharpened. Snow, pine, smoke. Declan's scent behind her. 10 royal guards around the square. Her heartbeat changed. Her body followed. The shift came hard, but not wrong. For one breath, the world blurred. Then Tessa stood on 4 paws beneath the winter sky. Silver-white fur caught the morning light. The entire square went silent. She was not larger than every wolf. She was not some creature from legend. She was simply whole. Across the stone, Miles took 1 step back. Declan shifted into his black wolf form at the edge of the crowd. Tessa expected him to move in front of her. He did not. He lowered his head. Not as a king surrendering, as a wolf recognizing another wolf's right to stand on her own. Tessa looked at Miles. She could have chased him from the stone. She could have answered humiliation with humiliation. Instead, she shifted back, wrapped herself in the cloak Nora brought forward, and faced him as herself. I spent 6 years believing you rejected me because I was broken. Her voice carried across the square. Now I know the truth. I was never broken. You were afraid of what would happen if I knew that. Declan returned to human form and stepped onto the gathering stone. His gaze moved over Garrick, Edwin, Miles, then finally rested on Tessa. The inquiry is complete. Tessa felt the whole pack hold its breath. The truth had finally been uncovered. Now someone had to answer for it. The silence after Declan's words felt heavier than any command Tessa had ever heard. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to settle around the gathering stone. Declan faced the pack first. Garrick Carrington is removed from leadership effective immediately, pending formal sentencing by the Crown Council. Edwin Voss is stripped of all medical authority and will answer for administering restricted suppressants without consent. Miles Carrington is removed from succession. A murmur moved through Moon Hollow, but Declan raised one hand and the sound faded. The rest of this pack will not be punished for crimes committed by its leaders. A temporary council will govern until lawful elections can be held. Tessa looked across the faces around her. Some were ashamed, some afraid. A few looked relieved. 6 years ago, she had wanted them to understand what they had done to her. Now she realized something unexpected. Their guilt could not give those years back. Their regret could not build a life for her. She had already done that herself. Miles stood near the edge of the stone, pale and silent. For once, he had nothing left to defend with status or dominance. Tessa walked toward him. He lifted his eyes. "Tessa, I did not know everything." "No," she said, "but you knew enough to ask questions." His jaw tightened. "I was young." "So was I." That ended it. She did not need an apology he had been forced into giving. She did not need to watch him fall any farther. She turned away. That choice felt better than revenge ever could have. Declan was speaking with Everett when Tessa crossed back toward the center of the stone. She waited until the king looked at her. "There is one more thing." Declan gave her his full attention. "Say it." Tessa looked at the people gathered around them. No rejected wolf should leave a pack with nothing because everyone is too ashamed to admit they still have rights. No healer should be allowed to give suppressants without consent. And Omegas should have representation on pack councils. Garrick made a sound of disbelief from across the square, but no one joined him. Declan looked at Tessa for a long moment. "Those changes will require review across the Northern Territories." Tessa held his gaze. "Then review them." Something warm entered his expression. "I will." It was not a promise to give her whatever she wanted. It was better. It was a promise to take her seriously. The crowd slowly began to disperse as royal officials moved Garrick, Edwin, and Miles away from the gathering stone. Nora approached Tessa and wrapped a heavier cloak around her shoulders. "Your first full shift took more out of you than you realize." Tessa managed a tired smile. "I noticed." "Then rest before you try to change the kingdom." "I will consider it." Nora laughed softly and walked away. Tessa turned and found Declan still watching her. For the first time since Cedar Vale, there were no guards between them, no accusation, no mystery. Only the question he had never forced her to answer. Declan stepped onto the same stone where Miles had rejected her 6 years before. Then he did something no one in Moon Hollow expected. He knelt. Gas moved through the square. Tessa stared at him. "Declan." "My wolf chose you before I understood why," he said. "But I will not use fate to decide for you." His voice was quiet enough that the people nearby had to listen. "If you want your cabin, your independence, and your silence, I will protect your right to all three." He looked directly into her eyes. "If you want me, choose me, not the crown." Tessa felt tears rise, but they did not feel like the tears she had swallowed here 6 years ago. Those had come from losing a future someone else controlled. These came because the future was finally hers. She stepped closer and touched his cheek. "Stand up." Declan rose. "I do not want a king beneath me," she said. "I want my mate beside me." His breath caught. Tessa placed her hand over his heart and let her wolf rise gently inside her. Warmth passed between them, steady and clear. The mate mark formed beneath her palm, silver light fading into his skin, like moonlight sinking into water. Declan looked down, then back at her. "May I?" Tessa smiled through her tears. "Yes." He placed his hand over her shoulder, careful and still. Her wolf answered his. The second mark appeared, warm but painless, and the bond settled between them with a quiet certainty that felt nothing like the bond she had lost. This one did not feel like a chain. It felt like a door she had chosen to open. Around the gathering stone, the 10 royal guards lifted their voices in a long, united howl. Tessa closed her eyes and listened. 6 years ago, she had walked north alone because no one wanted her to stay. Tomorrow, she would return to Cedar Vale with the Alpha King beside her, and for the first time, she would have to decide what it meant to go home without being alone. 6 months later, winter returned to Cedar Vale, but Tessa no longer heard silence the same way. The old cabin still stood beneath the pines, its chimney leaning slightly to the east. Its porch boards worn smooth by 6 years of solitary footsteps. Nothing about it had been erased. Tessa had insisted on that. She did not want a palace built over the place where she had learned to survive. She wanted the past to remain visible, not as a wound, but as proof. Beyond the cabin, however, the clearing had changed. 4 small cottages now stood between the trees. A shared medical room had been added beside the old animal shelter. A wide fire circle occupied the center of the settlement, and a modest crown office sat near the new road leading south. They called the place Moonhaven. It was not a city. It was not even a proper village yet, but rejected omegas, packless wolves, and families pushed aside by stronger packs had begun arriving. Some stayed for a week, some for months. No one had to beg for permission to sleep safely. Tessa spent part of each month at the royal court with Declan, where she worked with Nora and several pack representatives to review new protections across the Northern Territories. Forced suppressant use had been prohibited. Rejected wolves could no longer be stripped of basic property rights without review. Omega representation had begun expanding on local councils. The changes were slow. Some alphas resisted them. Some traditions were harder to move than stone. Tessa had learned not to confuse progress with perfection. Moon Hollow was changing too. Garrick Carrington had been permanently removed from leadership. Edwin Voss had lost his medical license and faced crown judgment for what he had done. Miles no longer stood in line to become Alpha. A temporary council now governed the pack, while new leadership was being chosen. Tessa did not return there often. She no longer needed to. On the first evening of the new snowfall, she stood outside her cabin and watched children from one of the cottages chase each other around the fire circle. Their laughter carried through the trees. Declan came up the path behind her carrying 2 mugs of hot cider. He handed one to her. "You are staring at the roof again." Tessa looked up at the cabin. "It still leans." "I offered to fix it." "You offered to replace half the cabin." "That would also fix it." She smiled. 6 months ago, smiling beside him had felt unfamiliar. Now it came easily. Declan did not live at Moonhaven full-time. He was still king, with councils, disputes, treaties, and responsibilities that could not be abandoned for romance. Tessa liked that. She had her work. He had his. They chose where the two lives met. A soft rustle moved through the trees. Tessa turned. 10 black wolves emerged from the pines and spread across the clearing. Everett was among them, his old injury long healed. The sight would once have sent Tessa reaching for her mother's knife. Now she shook her head. "You brought all 10 again." Declan looked pleased with himself. "They insisted." "Of course they did." The wolves settled around the clearing, familiar and calm. For a moment, Tessa saw the first night layered over this one. Snow, darkness, 10 silent shapes around her home, a king standing outside a door she had spent years keeping closed. Declan seemed to understand where her thoughts had gone. "Do you ever miss living here alone?" Tessa looked toward Moonhaven. A young Omega she had met only 3 days earlier was helping Nora sort dried herbs near the medical room. The girl had arrived frightened, convinced that being rejected meant she had failed at life. Tessa recognized that belief. She also recognized how long it could take to unlearn it. "Sometimes I miss the quiet," Tessa said. A burst of laughter came from the cottages. She smiled. "But I do not miss being forgotten." Declan took her hand. He did not pull her closer. He simply stood beside her. One of the royal wolves lifted its head and howled. Then another joined. Soon, all 10 voices rose beneath the winter moon. Tessa handed Declan her mug. Warmth moved through her body as her wolf answered. A moment later, silver-white paws touched the snow. She ran past the porch, circled the clearing, then stopped beside the royal wolves. 10 voices became 11. Declan remained in human form near the cabin, watching her with the same quiet respect he had shown the first night. Tessa lifted her face to the moon and added her voice to theirs. 6 years earlier, she had walked into the forest because she believed being unwanted meant she was worth less. Now she understood something different. Being rejected did not define her. Being chosen by a king did not define her either. The life she built, the truth she faced, and the choices she made did. Maybe that is the part worth remembering. Real strength does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it looks like setting a boundary, asking one more question, or choosing kindness after disappointment. I think Tessa found freedom only when she stopped letting other people name her worth. What do you think mattered most in her journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories about courage, dignity, and second chances stay with you, subscribe and join us for the next one.